Beyond the Veil, Our Journey Home by Diane Goble. Preface. We all know we're going to die someday. We just don't want to talk about it or think about it, but it's always there. That fear lurking in the background, that monster waiting to strike, the grim reaper coming to take our loved one or us away. It's in the news headlines every day. We can't escape it. As a child, I remember having an intense fear of death and no idea of what death really meant. I knew several of my 90-something-year-old great-grandparents briefly, and then they just didn't come around anymore. My mother's grandmother died in her sleep in the bedroom next to mine, unbeknownst to me. Her father dropped dead of a heart attack a few months after he retired. A car speeding through the crosswalk in front of my elementary school hit a classmate. She just never came back to class. Nobody said anything later. It seemed to me people just disappeared and were never seen again. I wondered, where did they go? I began to fear that my parents would suddenly disappear, and my younger sister Bobby and I would be orphaned. When they went out for an evening, I would sit by my window watching for their car, unable to sleep until they were safely home. We had a big oil-burning furnace in the basement. I feared it would explode and burn the house down with all of us inside. I had a great fear of fire. I don't know where the fear came from, unless it was just that I was born during World War II and my father was in the Navy and there was talk about the Holocaust, Pearl Harbor, and the atomic bomb, and duck and cover drills at school when the air raid sirens went off, scaring the crap out of everybody that the Russian bombers were coming. I doubted my desk was going to protect me. Then a month before my 11th birthday, Bobby died, accidentally killed when she was standing too close behind another 8-year-old when he swung his golf club, hitting her in the head. She apparently stumbled down the fairway to the 18th green where she collapsed and never regained consciousness. I wasn't with her when it happened. I didn't really know what happened, but was whisked away from the country club on Long Island, New York by a family friend to a waiting room in a hospital, where Bobby and I played as usual, practicing for our next ballet recital, until someone came in and told me she had died. Huh? It was my first funeral. I remember my father lifted me up next to the white satin-lined mahogany coffin where she lay to kiss her goodbye, and her lips were cold as ice. I didn't understand. Nobody warned me about that. Totally freaked me out. I had nightmares about being buried alive for years. Nobody talked about death. In fact, in my family, it seemed nobody ever talked about Bobby again. It was as if she never existed. We moved to another house in another city and didn't bring anything with us from the past. My parents had 2 more children. We moved on. But I knew they never got over her death. I lived in a state of confusion. In middle school, I began to study various religions and attend various churches looking for answers about the mysteries of life and death. As a teenager, I found some solace in Catholicism. I graduated from high school, went away to college for a couple of years, got married in the church, and had 3 children baptized in the church. Then I left the church over the birth control issue. After my 3rd child, my doctor said not to get pregnant because I had fibroid tumors and needed a hysterectomy. My priest said I had to make up my own mind about birth control, so I did, and figured if I could make these kinds of decisions myself, I didn't need to go to church anymore. I became more an agnostic, secular humanist, not believing in anything, not going to any church. I didn't give death a second thought until I drowned on July 18th, 1971, 2 months shy of my 30th birthday. My husband John was a member of a motion picture crew filming the movie Deliverance on the Chattooga River in northern Georgia. A group of 8 of us took 2 rafts out to have our own whitewater adventure on a hot Sunday afternoon, which was great fun until we made one little mistake that trapped our raft in a hydraulic at the bottom of a waterfall surrounded by large boulders. I'm going to share some of my near-death experience with you because it explains how I got into this work and is the source of my knowledge about the art of conscious dying. Much of what I'm going to share about the journey home may conflict with your beliefs, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're likely to find this information fits nicely into most belief systems, since it comes from the same source as all of them. It gives people some practical things to do when faced with a pending death in the family. I suddenly found myself stuck between a rock and a hard place, trapped by what local rivermen called a keeper hole, and I knew there was no way out. I was going to die. But instead of feeling terrified, I was very calm, very peaceful. Time slowed way down. I was thinking quite rationally and logically about what would be the better way to die, and chose drowning over being pummeled to death into the rocks. Someone still inside the raft was holding onto my arm while my body was outside of the raft, repeatedly being sucked down and pushed up by the raging water. I caught a quick breath and yelled, "Let go!" He did. There was no struggle to reach the surface, no panic to breathe or not breathe. I just inhaled the water, calmly surrendered to the river, and everything went black, just as I had every reason to believe it would. I had no belief in an afterlife. But then something quite remarkable happened. It was as if I had simply closed my eyes and then opened them again, but instead of being under the water drowning, I was floating high above the forest and the river, looking down at the raft and all the people who were gathering around the scene at the river's edge. I saw John looking around frantically for me, jumping out onto a rock, ready to jump into the river to try to save me. But I knew it was no use, because my body was trapped under the raft, and I was, well, not in it. With that thought, I instantly found myself by John's side, reaching out to stop him. But my hand passed right through his body, and he showed no reaction. That was when I realized I must be dead, and there was nothing more anyone else could do here. I felt myself being suddenly pulled away from the river and forest, and the earth environment quickly disappeared. I seemed to be in an endless darkness, moving through something like a tunnel or vortex towards a beautiful, brilliant golden light a zillion miles away. I could see streams of light rushing past me as I moved forward at the speed of light. Or was the light moving closer to me? I wasn't sure whether I was moving or the lights were moving or both or neither. There was no wind or sense of movement, no sound. It seemed to be a timeless state with no apparent motion, yet I seemed to be getting closer to it, expanding, becoming one with this light. There was nothing uncomfortable or frightening about this. Instead, I felt I was surrounded, wrapped in blissful feelings of unconditional love beyond anything I'd ever experienced on earth. I sensed the presence of a being of light traveling beside me. I don't know who it was, perhaps my guardian angel. Immediately, I realized I had always known this being, and that this being knew everything about me and still loved me unconditionally. There was no moral superiority or judgment. It had no discernible shape, no gender. I was filled with peace and joy, amazing grace. We communicated telepathically, without sound or words. Each question that came to me was answered immediately, before I could even ask it. It was more like I was remembering things I already knew rather than receiving new information. I laughed to myself for not remembering while I was in my body that this is how it all works. This is our journey home. It all made perfect sense in that instant. And I thought how different life would be if, while embodied, we remembered that there is no death. It is all just a continuum of life in different forms, in different realities, always changing, always evolving. Everything suddenly made complete sense. I remembered that we are not human beings who have a soul. We are souls who incarnate as human beings, so we can experience life and relationships in the physical world. I saw the Source, God, as an eternal, living, changing, evolving system of being and becoming. God is everything we can't see when embodied, but when our body dies, the veil drops, and we see clearly the reality that lies beyond our human senses. Humans do not have souls that lie in wait on some other side to then be judged and punished or rewarded for eternity, as some religions would have us believe. Nor are we insignificant, useless beings who live short, purposeless lives on planet Earth only to die and turn to dust, as atheists think. We are eternal beings of light who come and go from the spiritual world to the physical world, from a spiritual essence in and out of physical bodies, as the experiential part of our soul's eternal journey evolves. Subsequent to each physical lifetime, our soul, consciousness, returns to Source to integrate new learning and knowledge into the collective consciousness, which contributes to the evolution of human consciousness and the raising of our individual vibration to a higher frequency of light. I know, what the heck does that mean? It made perfect sense to me at the time. I remembered everything I had forgotten, including that I had done this before, made this transition many times, and that I was a being of light, a soul, having just returned from another human experience. Reincarnation, which I had previously viewed as an amusing concept, suddenly made perfect sense to me. It's not about who we were in another life, how much money or things we accumulated, or how powerful we became. It's about involvement of spirit in the evolution of human consciousness. Souls incarnate as sentient beings, not to become more powerful humans, but to become more powerful expressions of unconditional love in the physical world. Not to become domineering and controlling, or accumulate wealth and property, or become powerful bankers or political leaders, but to practice kindness and compassion toward our fellow humans and all life on the planet. We are learning to balance our humanity with our divinity, to evolve our consciousness by recycling and purifying our energy as we learn to express unconditional love in the world. Or, as Jesus said more succinctly, the meek shall inherit the earth. The Bible suddenly made complete sense. I had read it before as stories and metaphors and not understood its deeper meaning, but now I saw clearly that it was just interpreted differently by different religions, as are all descriptions of the afterlife, based on the level of consciousness of the observer. But regardless of who is observing or interpreting, it all comes down to one truth. God is the love in the light, and we are all that. As I got closer, the light grew brighter and more intense, yet I could look directly into it without recoiling. God is unconditional love, and as a prism separates white light into a spectrum of colors, everything is projected from this clear light. God is pure consciousness, without human qualities or desires, constantly creating the ground of being. God is not a big guy with a long white beard sitting on a throne surrounded by a choir of angels being worshipped by hordes of disembodied souls waiting to be judged. There is no God that demands sacrifice or chooses one side or over another in human battles for wealth or territory, nor promises rewards to those who kill others in God's name. Religious zealots, oligarchs, and kings make all of that up to control populations by fear and intimidation. Suddenly I could see beyond the veil. A million colors sparkled like jewels in a field of diamonds as I moved into the light and merged with it. An environment was revealed before me more beautiful, more colorful, more vibrant, and more alive than the most beautiful scenery on earth. Not a landscape, but a celestial scape. There was light everywhere, but no sun, no clouds, no sky, no darkness, no shadows, only variations of light far beyond the color spectrum we are able to see with human eyes. Without eyes, we are able to see so much more. With the being of light as my tour guide, we traveled, flew, floated to many different areas where I saw incredible scenes and living beings of light going about their daily lives. If something caught my attention and I wanted to know more about it, I only had to notice it, and I was immediately transported or it appeared closer to me with the thought, what's that over there? Whoosh! It was in my face, so to speak. Yes, I didn't have a face. I was shown healing centers and halls of learning where I observed newly arriving souls being acclimated to these surroundings before they were ready to return to their families. They were being attended to by spiritual healers who were using light and energy to ease their fears and help them remember who they really are and how the universe works, to clear up any misunderstandings they acquired during their human lives due to erroneous information. Many of these souls had been so deeply entrenched in the physical world and their emotions, they were unable to recognize their true selves during their journey home and would need more time to acclimate. In another area, souls preparing to reincarnate into new physical bodies were being helped by the soul family, their soul family, to make decisions about the circumstances for their next lives, relationships, and families. Decisions that would help them work through the lessons they failed to learn in previous lives, karma, as well as new lessons about being both human and divine while in a physical body. I remembered this as the perfecting or purifying process a soul goes through as part of its eternal spiritual journey, as I had done so many times before. After exploring and refreshing my memory about the activities of souls in this dimension, the being of light reminded me how to increase my vibration and guided me to another light frequency where higher learning takes place. I was told I had been recalled home because I had a special mission in this life, but had drifted off course. We telepathically discussed my return to my body, which now seemed to me to be Diane's body, and I had no interest in it, as we were approaching what I perceived to be a cluster of crystal structures, which appeared to grow larger and more complex. From afar, they shimmered like a mirage on hot desert sand. As we drifted closer, it appeared to be a crystal city. We settled at the foot of the most prominent conical-shaped tower, which was now so tall I couldn't see its top. I was told this was the Hall of Knowledge, and if I chose to return to Diane's body, I would be given information to bring back with me. My mission was to be a messenger and share this information with others to help human beings grasp the important but misunderstood concept that we don't die. Our physical body dies, but who we were before we were born and while our bodies function survives bodily death. I was told this information would not only accelerate individual souls along their spiritual path, but accelerate the evolution of consciousness of humanity, which is the path to peace on earth. Though reluctant to leave this beautiful, loving experience, I was all in favor of contributing to world peace. With simply that thought, I suddenly found myself being pulled toward and into this amazing crystal tower and spiraling upwards through what appeared to me to be shelves of books and scrolls, apparently absorbing knowledge as I went. I suddenly burst through the top of the tower into a slow-motion shower of multicolored, sparkling crystal shards, and at the same instant, my head burst out of the water in the river. The roar of rushing water all around me suddenly shattered the peacefulness I had enjoyed during my journey beyond the veil. I was back in my body, 100 yards downstream from the raft, which was still stuck in the keeper hole, with one man still inside. I quickly grabbed onto the nearest rock to gather my wits and noticed the other man and woman from our raft were hanging onto rocks and nearby. I had no memory of my body tumbling under the raft or coming out from under it or trying to breathe or struggling to hold my breath underwater. I also had no memories of being swept along by the current through the treacherous rapids, around boulders and fallen trees, to the calm pool below where I ended up basically without a scratch. As soon as my head popped out of the water, I was aware of being back in my body and in the river. I was totally conscious and had no need for resuscitation or medical attention. A good thing, since we were deep in the forest, miles from civilization. I was speechless and astonished and had no words to articulate what I had just experienced. John, who had successfully traversed the same rapids ahead of us in another four-person raft, later told me I mumbled something about having been somewhere, but nothing else coherent. In the days that followed, I tried to describe it to a couple of people, but they looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. I didn't know what happened to me. I didn't even know what to call it. The rivermen said I survived because I surrendered to the river. As I remember how cold the water was, and from my subsequent studies into the NDE, I think my body may have gone into hypothermia and I was completely unconscious. Everything just shut down until I was safe. Imagine that. However, the instantaneous switch from one reality to another and back again, suddenly observing the scene from above and then crashing through the top of a building and my head popping out of the water at the same instant, and how I recovered consciousness so quickly at that instant, is all quite a conundrum. I didn't know it then, and not for a long time after, that this experience was my deliverance. My experience of life continuing beyond the veil certainly relieved me of my fear of death. It also showed me how to help others overcome fear of death by helping them remember that there is no death except of the temporary physical body we wear while on earth. We go on. Life goes on. Love goes on. The adventure continues. It has become my sole mission in this life to assist during humanity's transformation to a higher state of consciousness, as I've come to understand it over the 4 decades since I left my body. To me, this has come to mean that as humans, we need to get beyond our egocentric, ethnocentric, earth-centric behavior and thinking. Thanks to science, we now know that Earth is not the center of the universe. Our solar system is not the center of the galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is not the center of the universe, and the universe is multidimensional. The vastness of all that is pretty much beyond the human brain's current ability to comprehend. But humans are not stuck at this level. The evolution of consciousness involves us remembering as humans that we are more than human. We are also fundamentally powerful spiritual beings capable of endless possibilities for creation in an evolving physical universe. All I ask is that you open your mind and suspend your judgments as you read this book for the first time. Then run it through your critical thinking filter. Discard what doesn't fit and build a stronger, more sustainable foundation on what does. Step 1 is remembering that we are all spiritual beings having human experiences, and at the end of each human lifetime, our journey home is a continuation of our ongoing eternal spiritual lives. We don't die when our body dies. We simply go through a transition from one state of awareness to another. We simply step out of our body, bid our loved ones goodbye for now, and move into the arms of our loved ones waiting beyond the veil. We have returned home in the light from which we came. This knowledge allows us to prepare ourselves for our transition whenever or however it happens. It is not meant that this book be read only once, but read again and again over the years. Each time you read it, you will find deeper meaning and greater comfort in times of need. Hopefully, it will help you live this life in peace and joy, with freedom from any trepidation about dying or death. The information herein was gleaned from my experience beyond the veil to share with those who are ready to put it into action in their lives. If I occasionally sound authoritative, it is not my intention, it is my writing style. This information comes strictly from my personal experience and studies, trying to make sense of it for myself, as well as to help others remember and find peace of mind, such as I have. This book has been condensed from a more extensive training course that I developed in 2007 to introduce professional and paraprofessional healers, hospice caregivers, nursing educators, and ministers to another way of looking at death and dying. as certified transition guides are trained to teach this process and help their clients reconcile their lives well before their deaths and compose their own personal transition guidebook, Chapter 7, to comfort them during their transition process. This print version I consider a second addition to my ebook, How to Die Consciously, Secrets from Beyond the Veil, from 2011. As long as I had to get the text ready to be published in paperback, I wanted to add more up-to-date information about the Death with Dignity laws and changes concerning end-of-life care over the past few years. I did do some editing, otherwise there is not a lot new in this version. Although it had been my best-selling ebook, I've changed the title in hopes of being able to share this information with a wider audience. This handbook is applicable to everyone, whether they are sick or perfectly healthy, because for all of us, physical life at some point will end. But it is particularly germane to those who have received a diagnosis that has even the potential to be terminal, or who are becoming frail from advancing age. It is also for their caregivers, who can be helpful family transition guides by preparing their dying friend or loved one for their last great adventure in life. This method of conscious dying is non-religious, non-denominational, but based on spiritual concepts, and may be adapted or used in part with most any religious practice or without religious rituals. Every religion has its own name for the conscious field of energy that created or caused everything in the observable universe to exist, and its own dogma defining who or what that is. They all contain some truth. These myths and stories are all attempts to explain the same single source, which are then labeled for common understanding: God, Allah, Jehovah, etc. I neither condone nor dismiss any of them, nor suggest that I have the definitive answers. Throughout this book, I will interchangeably use some of those names, all referring to the source of our existence. Please feel free to substitute whatever name brings you comfort and meaning. In practice, this method may only involve the dying person or include the whole family and support team as active participants. It is flexible enough that even an atheist may find some comfort from having given it some attention once he finds himself out of his body and still conscious, especially in the case of sudden death. If you are the soon-to-be departing person due to age or illness, you could read this handbook, develop your own plan, practice it on your own, and compose and record your own personal transition guidebook. However, you may find it more comforting to enlist a friend or caregiver to work through the steps with you, help you compose and practice reading your guidebook with you, and be there to read it to you during your transition, which is its purpose. It's easier to practice the guided imagery exercises when you have another person to read the scripts to you. Especially with your personal transition guidebook, hearing another person's voice during your transition will keep you from being distracted by the wonder of your experience and whatever images, pleasant or unpleasant, may arise in your consciousness. I mention unpleasant experiences because it seems the thoughts one dwells on most often during their lives, as well as one's thoughts at the time of transition, are carried over in consciousness, and especially negative thoughts may manifest in frightening images described by some NDEers who encountered them as hellish. I would also suggest that the person you choose as your transition guide be impartial, or at least not be someone so emotionally attached to you that he or she is unable to let go or be supportive of your last wishes. Sometimes in this book I'm talking to or about the person acting as the transition guide, and sometimes I'm talking to or about the person who will be departing. Hopefully readers will not be confused about which one I'm referring to at the time. Chapter 1 describes the near-death experience and the information I received about transitioning during my NDE. Current literature concerning the survival of consciousness after death is also discussed. Chapter 2 provides information to help family members have the conversations that are so difficult yet so important to have before it is too late to have them. Documents such as advanced healthcare directives, organ donation, and funeral arrangements become discussions the whole family can participate in, not just for one person, but also for all members. Palliative and hospice care options and the current death with dignity laws are also discussed. Chapter 3 discusses end of life in terms of transition, not dying, which makes the last part of life an ongoing adventure, not the end of it. I discuss the value of working with a transition guide as a personal assistant to prepare oneself for a peaceful process of reconciling one's life through forgiveness and gratitude work, purifying one's energy field, and practicing letting go of earthly attachments. There are ideas for the transition guide, the family, and the person leaving about how to make it the most loving, compassionate experience for all concerned. Chapter 4 contains the elements of the practice of the art of conscious dying. There are simple scripts for the transition guide to read to the person leaving that teach a simple meditation relaxation exercise that can be helpful to anyone, but especially for people preparing for transition, to help them get comfortable with this practice while they are still capable of doing so. There is also a purification script which helps clear accumulated toxins and traumas, so the soul may exit the body through the top of the head directly into the light. Chapter 5 looks at working with the subconscious mind and gives some guidelines about writing your own scripts for guided meditations, which may relate to one's life review, creating an inner workspace to do the necessary work to prepare oneself for a peaceful and joyful transition, and imagining one's journey home beyond the veil. As a certified clinical hypnotherapist, I offer tried and trusted guidelines for working with the subconscious mind. Chapter 6 discusses the practice of the art of conscious dying and how it can be helpful for people emotionally and psychologically as they undergo treatments, procedures, and surgeries to keep their bodies alive. You'll learn how guided visualizations can be used to facilitate reconciliation and help a person get in touch with her spiritual self. Chapter 7 explores the origins of books of the dead, or funerary texts, from ancient to modern-day cultures as background. It is a guide to help people compose their own transition guidebooks, using their own words to assist and comfort them on their journey home. A sample of a personal transition guidebook is included to provide readers with suggestions they may want to include in their own personal transition guidebook to keep them from being distracted by what may actually occur during their transition. It is merely a template upon which you can lay your own personal beliefs about the transition process and what comes next. Above all, it should be in your own words, according to your own beliefs. In the appendix, readers will find a list of questions that can be used to encourage a person to review his life and deal with karmic issues before taking leave, so they won't need to be encountered during one's life review on the other side, which is what the guided imagery exercises and personal transition guidebook are designed to do. Also, in the appendix, for those interested in death with dignity laws, current U.S. laws are provided. There is a great deal of debate going on currently in Europe as well, so check on progress where you live with compassionandchoices.org. You'll also find samples from the Egyptian and Tibetan books of the dead to show how far we've come from the mysterious to the practical. And finally, there is one of my favorite poems, The Blind Man and the Elephant, which makes the point that we tend to stay stuck in our own perspective and need to step back to see the bigger picture. You can't see the picture when you're in the frame.